Lady from New Mexico is recognized for any questions you may have for the panel.
Thank you, Chairman. So we're back here again with extreme Republican politics of grievance and acrimony, chaos over governance. So what I want to do, though, is make sure that we don't become numb to this kind of behavior and to this kind of legislating. Because we must condemn political vengeance and Trump's desire for political revenge every single time it rears its ugly head. You know, when MAGA Marjorie Taylor Greene, as you pointed out, files 10 impeachment proceedings and censure motions, we should say no. Reasonable Republicans should say no. And indeed, as our ranking member pointed out, reasonable Republicans have said no. Former Homeland Security Secretary, as you pointed out, said that the Republicans have failed to put forth evidence that meets the bar. Ken Buck, one of your colleagues, said this is a policy difference. Over and over again, we're hearing that there is a distinction and policy differences do not rise to what the Constitution calls for with impeachment. And to talk about unworthy men is precisely an issue that then James Madison went on to define. So I would point out that after that discussion was had, there was an attempt to say maladministration. So we don't like your policy, right? Maladministration should be a cause for impeachment. So, you know, Chairman Green, your point about unworthy, James Madison himself argued against allowing maladministration or policy differences for being a point of impeachment. He said, James Madison, and I would quote this, as he sought to defeat that Constitutional Convention amendment, he said, that would be equivalent, quote unquote, equivalent to a tenure during pleasure of the Senate. There was indeed an effort to make sure there was a separation of powers. So as our ranking member Thompson pointed out, if you don't like what they're doing, take them to court. If you don't like what they're doing, there are remedies unless it is treason, bribery, or high crimes and misdemeanors. So the Constitutional Convention rejected a vague standard of simply unworthy, and instead, you know, I would hope that my reasonable Republicans would also reject this attempt. And I think it is very different than what we've pointed out has happened before. Ranking Member Thompson, I need to tell you that I am so grateful for the work that you did as chair of the January 6th committee, because you shone a bright light for all Americans to see on prime time and in detail how close we came, how close the insurrectionists came to the members of Congress, some of whom are sitting here today, and our staff, how close we came to allowing a president who had lost an election, who knew he had lost election, from staying in power. And I know from watching you in those hearings how much you believe in our democracy, how much you have worked, as you pointed out, during your entire tenure. The entire time there's been a Homeland Security Committee, you've been on it. So share with us a bit of what you see when you look at what happened around January 6th and how close we came there and what we're looking at now with this Mayorkas impeachment.
Well, thank you very much. I think that there are sharp differences between this sham impeachment and the work of the bipartisan January 6th Select Committee. The Select Committee uncovered actual crimes committed by the former president. In fact, he's facing trial for some of them in federal court and in Georgia right now. Those are clearly impeachable offenses. Republicans cannot allege that Secretary Mayorkas has committed any particular crime, let alone a high crime and misdemeanor. Instead, they're relying on vague and poorly written charges. The other comment I make is that in reviewing Secretary Mayorkas' enforcement guidelines that was referred to earlier, the Supreme Court recognized that setting immigration enforcement guidelines is necessary and common. They sided with Secretary Mayorkas 8-1. So they're saying you have to use the discretion of the secretary to administer the laws. It's not a, here it is. You have to do the best you can with it. And it's that discretion that the court says the secretary has, and it continues to rule in that favor. So again, there's no bribery alleged against Secretary Mayorkas. There's no documented high crime or misdemeanor, as we have had in other impeachment settings. So again, it's people saying we're going to impeach him and not using any facts that will hold up in a court of law. Obviously, the impeachment will go through the House, and if it passes, it'll go to the Senate. But it's so unfortunate that the last time we even brought it up was 148 years ago. And here we are at this point, 148 years later, with what a lot of us think is, in fact, a sham impeachment. We can work it out as Democrats and Republicans, but the die was already cast before we even considered any of the other so-called charges. One of the things I can tell you, I offered a simple amendment that the secretary be afforded due process. And I was ruled out of order. And then I offered an amendment in the markup, and it was defeated. I mean, that's how we as a country got to our greatness, is assuming that everyone has an opportunity not just to face his or her accuser, but also have an opportunity to provide a defense. We made that effort to just set some ground rules consistent with the rules of every other impeachment hearing, and it was failed. So it was clear when due process failed in the markup, I knew democracy was in trouble.
Democracy was in trouble. And I think that that's part of the concern, is that when we are using impeachment process rather than elections, policy issues are for elections, that we are using this impeachment process for something it's not intended. And, the chairman referenced the Belknap impeachment. Bribery. What was the real reason why Belknap was impeached? It was bribery, is that correct?
That's correct.
Is that correct?
Are you asking me?
Bribery.
Actually, the third article was his failure to do his job.
Well, but.
There were
wasn't
3
the-
articles of impeachment on him. There were crimes, you're right.
Right.
But
What-
clearly,
can
our
you-
founders
can you
did
share
not
with-
intend
can you
for it
share
to be
with-
just
Can you share
crimes.
with us? Can you share with us what the crimes were?
Bribery.
Bribery. So in that instance, he was getting a cut from a trader, is that correct? And
Well,
he was living a lavish lifestyle, big parties, had
No doubt.
lots more money than his salary would have intended.
No doubt.
Yeah, so he was engaged in bribery.
He was. He did engage in
bribery.
a crime, but they also put a third article on there for failing to do his job.
But the real issue was
And
bribery.
President Nixon didn't commit a crime himself, but had several impeachment articles against him for being dishonest and for not following the law.
So, but as we know, using Belknap, who engaged in bribery, using President Nixon, who, while I actually agree with some of the actions President Nixon did as policy, amazingly, he did some very good things. I mean, to use Nixon as an example, when he
I'm
resigned
using the
in
example
disgrace.
of the impeachment people going against him, not Mr. Nixon.
Nixon
Yeah,
resigned in
just to be
disgrace.
clear.
But I would ask, besides, so talking about bribery and the salaries, besides the salary as a public servant, did you receive any testimony that Secretary Mayorkas received any financial benefits, Chairman?
No, that's not
No.
in the article. The
Okay.
articles are
So-
about him violating the laws passed by Congress with his
And-
memos and other things.
Yeah.
That's not even in our article, so
Right.
no, of course not.
Well, of course not. There was nothing like that.
Yep.
Professor Deborah Pearlstein testified in her testimony, right, Ranking Member? She says impeachable offenses against the public trust are instances in which an official is willfully acting for his own benefit or his own power or foreign power. And she found no evidence of any financial benefit flowing for him, no political benefit. In fact, our ranking member has pointed out that this is a thankless job, that he took on a job for which he has been attacked daily out of his love of this country. So I'm struck by a floor speech from the Republican chairman of the Subcommittee on Immigration, Integrity, Security, Enforcement, Republican Tom Clintock, who described this attempt to impeach Secretary Mayorkas as a, open quote, perilous path. He said House Resolution 863 would, open quote, utterly destroy the separation of powers at the heart of our Constitution. Ranking Member Thompson, do you want to elaborate on why you think that this is so dangerous to the separation of powers?
Well, the framers of our Constitution, as a number of people have indicated, they spent a lot of time putting this document together. And I think they respect the separation of powers. And so we make the laws. And after we make the laws, we pass them on, ostensibly for the executive branch to carry forth. In this instance with the secretary, we don't give him enough resources to do a job, so he has to use whatever level that he can to address the problem. And so in trying to address the problem without the proper resources, he's doing the best job he can. But he's not breaking the law. He's just doing the best he can with the resources that Congress has provided. As I said, a majority of our committee who's had an opportunity to vote on provide more resources to the department have voted against providing resources. Now they want to impeach a man for not doing his job when you didn't give him the resources to do it.
So, to concur, when you say the majority, the Republicans have voted against providing Mayorkas with the resources necessary to do the job. Is that?
That's correct.
Yes. And as I understand, they've also refused to entertain the supplemental appropriations request sent to the Hill in October. And now, as we've heard, they're trying to sink the bipartisan Senate border bill because Trump told them, sink the bipartisan border bill.
Well, it's disingenuous to say the border is broken and when opportunities to put resources to address those issues, you vote against them. And then we get word that the president, former president, is saying he's against the bipartisan bill, but he's for the impeachment of Secretary Mayorkas. None of that makes any sense. We have to put resources that our men and women need along the border. The technology is so important. It's a force multiplier for security. In order to do it, we have to invest in it. And at every opportunity, when we don't invest, we make that border a vulnerable situation. The secretary can only do with what the resources we provide him.
Yes. So you keep saying it doesn't make any sense, but it does make a very crass political sense, is if you want to run on this and you want to have the chaos, because Republicans seem to run on chaos. But sadly, we actually do know what an impeachable offense looks like, because the American people lived through what evidence of high crimes and misdemeanors look like. We in this room lived through what evidence of high crimes and misdemeanor looked like when insurrectionists stormed the Capitol, threatened to hang Vice President Pence and kill Speaker Pelosi. They attacked us because Trump wanted to delay certification and in essence overturn the 2020 election. That violent attack on our democracy led to the death of 5 law enforcement officers and seriously injured 140 more officers. That's what an impeachable offense looks like. That's what high crimes and misdemeanors looks like. 179 Republicans voted against impeaching Trump for an insurrection that they witnessed firsthand as they ran for cover or barricaded themselves in their office. And I assume many of those same Republicans will vote for this sham and unprecedented impeachment of a cabinet member where there is no evidence of any financial harm or crime. Mr. Chairman, I asked unanimous consent to enter into the record the January 30th, 2024 Wall Street Journal editorial board's article, "Impeaching Mayorkas Achieves Nothing. A policy dispute doesn't qualify as a high crime and misdemeanor."
Without objection.
So the op-ed points out that House Republicans, open quote, dislike how the administration is interpreting immigration law. But Congress has failed, close quote. So they point out that's Congress that has failed to reform our immigration laws. As we heard from our ranking member, it's Congress that has failed to provide for the resources that are needed. The op-ed goes on, and the Wall Street Journal is not seen by anybody as, I think, a liberal rag. It's a reputable journal, often described by some as conservative. I'm not taking a stand there. But they end with this sentence: grandstanding is easier than governing. And Republicans have to decide whether to accomplish anything other than impeaching Democrats. Grandstanding is easier than governing. I end where I began, that Republicans don't seem to be able to govern. Ranking member pointed out how little legislation has come out of this Congress, pointed out how little legislation has come out of Homeland Security. We need to get back to the business of bipartisan legislation that solves the problems rather than seeking to get camera clicks and impeachment articles written up where we know they're not going anywhere because there is nothing there. With that, I yield back.